Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Black Liberation Tech podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Renée Jordan, and today I'm going to talk about how I declared myself financially independent as an undergraduate student. I have seen in TikToks and social media and the news and different things how this time of uncertainty has brought uncertainty among students. And I wanted to share my story, but also provide a disclaimer. I went to undergraduate school a long time ago. So those things that are in place now as it relates to FAFSA and financial aid and federal assistance in terms of funding undergraduate school, I understand that the same things, my context really might not apply, but I want to share my story so that you can think about the types of questions that you can ask your parents, so that you can think about the types of questions that you can ask your financial aid office, so you can think about the things that you need to ask yourself. What does it look like for me to go to undergraduate school in terms of scholarships, in terms of grants, in terms of loans, in terms of working a federal work study, or even working off campus? One of the things that I noticed that some of my classmates did that I did not take advantage of was that they actually got jobs on campus that were not federal work study jobs. And as a result, they were able to get higher paying rates in terms of their hourly rate for the work that they were doing. One of those things was to serve as a dispatcher for campus police and operator for the campus. And so that allowed some people to have higher hourly rates. Some people had not only those jobs, but they also had a federal work study job. Some students worked off campus at Taco Bell at odd hours in order to help supplement going to school. So there are different ways, and I just wanted to share what helped me to get through school, and that was to declare myself financially independent. Now, I did write this down because I didn't want to miss anything, so please bear with me as I read, and I hope that you think about how you could talk to your parents, financial aid, or if you're a parent, how you could talk to your student and the reality of what it could look like for them to go to undergraduate school, how they can prepare, and the things that might have to change as a result of them going off on this endeavor. Okay, so here we go. After my first year of undergraduate school, I declared myself financially independent from my parents. The reality was my parents were not paying for me to go to college, and putting them on my FAFSA was creating a context that did not apply. The FAFSA said your parents are able to pay X, Y, and Z. The reality of my circumstances was that my parents had 4 other children at home and a mortgage, and they planned on retiring, which meant they did not have X, Y, and Z money for school. So I declared myself financially independent from my parents, which meant they could not claim me as a dependent on their taxes, and I was responsible for filing my taxes and stating that no one could claim me as a dependent. This financial independence also enabled me to apply for unsubsidized student loans. That meant whatever the original calculation was in terms of how much would be responsible for it, the loan amount was actually increased so that I could have more coverage as it related to my financial needs to attend school. Now, once again, I want to put out that disclaimer. I went to school a long time ago, so the context of what's happening in today's situation as it relates to the Department of Education and filling out a FAFSA and federal loans, they are not the same. And I recognize that. But I do want to tell my story to hopefully help somebody to ask the right questions. All right. So I was able to get access to more resources because I was moving in a way that factored in my reality. I was financially responsible for my education. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. In middle school, my mom pulled me to the side and said, hey, if you want to go to college, then you're going to have to get a scholarship. And so when I got into high school, that was my mission, to set myself up to get academic scholarships. And for undergraduate school, I was able to get a partial scholarship for the school of my choice, which was Hood College in Frederick, Maryland. And so I needed to make sure that I had myself covered for whatever gaps fell between my scholarship and my financial aid allotment in the form of student loans. So no tea, no shade on my parents. It was the reality of our Black middle class family living in Prince George's County, Maryland. It's not everyone's story. At the same time, my parents were saving for retirement, paying to live in one of the best zip codes in the DMV, which also allowed us access to good public education. Here are some other things that I did to help myself through undergraduate school. One of my girlfriends signed up with a temp agency, temporary staffing agency, where they filled half-day to long-term administrative vacancies. The types of vacancies that they filled included office and building concierge, so those people that are at the front door when you walk into a building or into an office, administrative assistants, executive assistants, office managers, office assistants, customer service, and many other different office positions and odd jobs. So, like data entry was a job that I've had before, data cleaning, mass mailings, conference prep, and they provided these services to different types of industries. So I've worked in education, I worked in government, I worked in nonprofit, I worked in corporate, I worked in tech, I worked in law offices, all kinds of spaces. She told me that her dad told her about it, and as a result, I decided to try it out for myself over my winter break of my freshman year of college. The benefit of the temp agency was that I was able to work during my breaks without committing beyond the length of my break. They paid more money than the retail positions that some of my schoolmates took over the summer. Employers loved that I was in undergraduate school. Someone even offered me a full-time position to stay instead of going back to school, but I turned them down and went back to school. And all of the locations were accessible to the DC Metro, which was great. It taught me discipline because it was first in, first out, meaning whoever was first at the agency that opened at 7 a.m. would get the first opening. And I was so consistent and received such great reviews that I started to get positions ahead of time and or pulled to the side to skip the line. I quickly learned professional etiquette, customer service, and how to get around downtown. Now, I will not say that I was perfect, had everything figured out or together, and that I never ran into any trouble. That was not the case. Nope. However, I will say that I was a quick study and did not make the exact same mistake twice. Would I invent a new type of mistake? Yes. I still invented new mistakes. It's the engineer in me that pushes me to break stuff to make it over again. Anyway, I will share with you two stories. One time I worked as an office assistant at a well-known newspaper. This was a million years ago before web conferencing services and AI companions. My job was to listen in on calls and take notes while someone who sold ad space made calls to their clients to tell them about a deal that they had going on. This temp position had the potential to turn into a multi-day assignment depending upon how things went. Me and my young, immature self showed up 5 minutes late. Please do not be late ever, ever, ever. If you are doing temporary assignments, always show up 15 minutes early. The bigger problem was that the newspaper company had security that you had to go through, and guests had to be escorted by an employee to get to wherever they were going. In hindsight, I should have gotten there 30 minutes early. By the time I got through security and they called up to the person who arranged the job and she came down to get me, I was 20 minutes late. My ignorant self had the nerve to part my lips and ask the woman who called in the temp assignment if I was going to get paid for the time that I waited downstairs. She noted that I was late. Well, the day goes on, and the woman who called in the assignment with the temp agency called in on the phone of the salesperson that I was working with for the day. Keep in mind, I had a headset attached to her phone because I have been taking notes. Well, the woman who called in this assignment starts by saying, "If that young lady gives you any," and at that moment, the salesperson unplugged my headset and just responded in the affirmative and hung up. My stomach dropped. I was ashamed. I was remorseful. I did the best I could for the rest of the day. And when the lady came to sign off on my timesheet, I apologized and said that I understood that I was late and understood that my pay would be docked. And the woman said that she did call into security and found out that I was waiting for a while and paid me for the full day. And while we left on amicable terms, I was not asked to return. Remember, I told you that the assignment had the opportunity for multiple days. I didn't get to stay beyond that one day. The good thing is that I learned my lesson. I was able to move on because my agency knew that I was a good temp. It was the kind of kick in the shin that straightened me out from that moment on. I was changed. Another lesson I learned was on a lighter note and did not prevent me from coming back to an assignment that had the potential of a multi-day assignment. I was filling in at the reception desk of a firm, and for whatever reason, I had a red permanent marker in my hand that was not working. So, what did I do? I shook the permanent marker. Well, I looked up and the permanent red marker ink splattered on the light colored walls. I was dumbfounded and mortified. Well, I could not play it off. So I told on myself and apologized. The person was actually fascinated at how far I got the ink to fly, said it was no big deal, that they needed to paint anyway, and they asked to have me back the next day. When the next day came, they also had someone there painting the walls. The lesson learned was just to confess when you figured out that you've made a mistake, apologize, learn from it, and don't do the exact same thing twice. Does this mean that I've never been late again? Nope. But I've never been that entitled again as a temp. Does that mean that I never made a mess again in an office as a temp? Nope. I temped at a place and was told to make coffee. I explained that I don't drink coffee and that they probably would not want me to make it as a result. I wasn't trying to be entitled. I was trying to warn them, but I made the strong coffee and ended up making a mess. I tried to tell them I tried. What are the lessons learned? Mistakes can go over better when you're not being entitled or arrogant. How does temping fit in this lesson about financial independence? With my financial independence came growth in recognizing the financial responsibility that I held for myself. One of the best parts about temping downtown was that I got to ride the train with my dad in the morning and evening. That was the most time we spent, just the two of us together on a regular basis. And that went on during my winter, spring, and summer breaks for at least 3 years and a whole year after I graduated from college. The temp agency and federal work study allowed me to have money in my pockets through college and pay my cell phone bill. Before going off to college, I watched the Oprah episode where people talked about the huge amounts of credit card debt that they got into when they went off to college. And as a result, I was able to avoid that experience. I did have one credit card with a $300 limit, and I still have a credit card with that financial institution to this day that speaks well on my credit report as my longest standing account. With all that being said, I want to encourage students and parents to ask questions based on the reality of their financial situations. Parents, if you cannot pay for college and cannot pay for the loans to support your student, just tell them. If you hope to retire someday or may even need to get financial assistance for yourself to go back to school, don't feel bad about not being able to assist your child when it comes to paying for school. Talk to the financial aid office to find out your options. And keep in mind that going to school part-time is also an option. There are even companies that, of which I will not name, but you can look them up, who pay for their employees to go to college. So once again, I'm sharing my story to hopefully help somebody else along the way. So just as a point of reflection and review, the FAFSA did not reflect my family's financial reality. And as a result, I needed to declare myself financially independent from my parents in order to make sure that I had access to the resources that would help me as an individual along the way. The decision to declare myself financially independent meant I was filing my own taxes, and my parents could not claim me as a dependent, and I had to say that no one else could claim me as a dependent. As a result, that allowed me to be eligible for unsubsidized loans. My context was that I was coming from a Black middle-class family in Prince George's County, and my parents were balancing mortgage, retirement, and other kids. And so, no tea, no shade. Once again, my mom told me up front, and gave me plenty of time to plan ahead that I would be responsible for my education beyond high school. In reflection, that financial independence also meant ownership of responsibility for me as an individual, and I can see how that has helped me along the way. Here's a reflective question that I want to ask you. What financial realities are you currently navigating that FAFSA or standard advice doesn't capture? Another point that I want to make is that it's important to work smart in college. The temp agency, it worked well for me because it was flexible. It paid a higher hourly rate than most jobs that I had available to me, and it was accessible through the DC Metro. So that meant I could get where I needed to go without having a car. And because it worked with my dad's work schedule, I was able to ride with him to the metro station. We got dropped off by my mom in the morning and picked us up in the evening. And it did not cause an extra burden to my parents in terms of them having to make sure that I got to work in a place that they weren't already going to. It helped me to learn discipline about getting up early and making sure that I was first when it came to showing up at the temp agency. If I wasn't first, I was close to it, because one thing I could do was get up early to make sure that I would have a job for the day. As a result of this work experience, I gained professional etiquette that helps me to this day, customer service experience, and professional skills that are something that you have to experience in order to hone. One of the pluses was that I got to ride the train with my dad, which allotted for some priceless bonding time with just the two of us. Here's another question that I want to ask you. How can you align your hustle, jobs, internships, side work with your bigger life circumstances instead of just following what everyone else does? The lessons I learned from those mistakes while working at the temp agency have helped me to navigate making mistakes even as a seasoned professional. I know what it means to be on time. I know what it means to have to apologize for mistakes and make corrections as a result. The lessons that I learned dealt with punctuality, humility, and reputation management. So keep in mind, the temp agency, they were my employers, while the different assignments were my assignments for the day. But because I had a good reputation with my employers, even when I made a mistake, they saw what it was. It was a one-time mistake. I had been working well with them for a long time, and that one mistake did not keep them from sending me out again. They were able to say, hey, this was one time out of how many times we sent Renee out? She'll be fine the next time. And I was. So make sure that where you are working, that you maintain a good reputation with your employer, so that if and when a mistake happens, they can say, hey, that was one time. They've been working with us for this long. I'm sure that they've learned their lesson. Hopefully they've learned their lesson and they'll be able to move on from this one mistake. Now, on the other hand, if you don't have a good reputation or you're constantly making the same mistakes, you might want to reevaluate what's really happening. Do you need to organize yourself in a different way? Do you need to take notes? Do you need to set reminders? Do you need to create calendar events to help organize what you have going on? Perhaps there's a lot of things happening and it's the small things that get away from you. Well, one of the things that I've learned to do, and I've mentioned this in another episode, is that I mix things up. So I have these big tasks that have deadlines that are down the line, but they require a lot of time and a lot of focus. I throw in the small things so that I can keep things moving. So keeping a list of those small things and saying, hey, what can I throw in there today, helps me keep progressing even when I have a big project going on. That way, I'm not putting things on hold that are outside of the project, because that project might take me some time. And if I waited, then the little things would get away from me and those other responsibilities would go unseen. And I could make mistakes mistakes as a result of not following the small pieces that are needed for my job. Now, with the red marker incident, that confession allowed me to be accountable for my action. I own my mistake. I apologize, and I no longer shake permanent markers wherever I am. If it's not working, you just throw it away and get another one. The coffee disaster, well, it helps to be honest up front. And although I ended up making a mess, I said to myself, hey, I told them I don't drink coffee, which also meant I don't make coffee, not to be rude to say I don't make coffee like I'm above making coffee. I really don't know how to make coffee. Nowadays, they have the Keurig, which is excellent. But when it came to measuring out how much coffee to put in the filter, and they said that they liked it strong, and so I'm thinking that meant you have to add more coffee grounds to the filter. It didn't work. Next time, what I would have done is ask someone to show me how to make it strong so that I could do it right the first time. All right. So the question that I want to ask you based on that, what's a mistake you have made recently that could have turned into a lesson if you stopped to ask, what is this trying to teach me? Now, in the broader scheme of things, I don't know if you've seen that episode of Oprah, but I would definitely recommend looking it up, whether you're a parent or a student, and see the kinds of experiences that others have had when it comes to credit cards and how much debt they will allow you to accrue and then expect for you to pay, knowing that you don't have a job, not a full-time job where you could have credit cards with high limits. So anyway, I started off with a $300 limit and I was responsible with that card. And as a result, it speaks well of me on my credit report now. Now, financial independence does not mean that things are perfect and everything goes well and that you might not have to borrow money that you will have to pay back at some point in time, but it is a part of continuous growth. And so from that, I want to ask you, what small financial decision today could set you up for success and long-term stability tomorrow? So I want to encourage both students and parents to speak your truth. Parents, if you can't pay it, just let your students know. And if possible, let them know early. So if that's middle school, let them know in middle school. If that's elementary school, let them know in elementary school so that they understand if they want to pursue higher education, which in the US cost, unless you go to certain schools, and I'm not going to name them, you're going to have to look them up, where they have a program where students work on campus, which allows them to waive tuition altogether and go to school for free because they're working on campus. Look the school up. There's one in particular. So if there's one, it's possible that there's more than one. But I want you all to look, use your search engines and find these different opportunities that are available. I didn't know about this school when I was applying. However, if I would have known, I still probably would have chosen the one I went to. However, it's also good to know what other opportunities are out there. So if you can't afford to pay for school, let your students know up front, let them know early so that they can make conscious decisions while they're in school, while they're in high school, while they're in middle school that will set them up for success later, whether it's academic scholarships, whether it's artistic scholarships, whether it's sports related scholarships, whether it's perhaps saving their money, working over the summer so that they're able to set themselves up for financial independence after high school. Here's a question that I want to ask you in response to that. What honest conversations about money, time, or energy do you need to have with your family or yourself right now? All right, so in closing, asking questions grounded in your actual circumstances leads to better opportunities. Don't shape your story to fit the form. Shape the form to fit your story. In other words, I was an excellent student. I had good grades and I was able to get a scholarship, but my parents weren't paying for school. So anything outside of what that scholarship covered was my responsibility. That meant I did not need to include them on my FAFSA. And I also needed to take another step by not just saying that I'm financially independent, but being financially independent. And that meant doing my own taxes, saying that no one could claim me as a dependent, and my parents not claiming me as a dependent on their taxes after that point. For those of you who've made it this far, thank you for listening to another episode of the Black Liberation Tech podcast. I want to ask you to share one lesson that you learned from a financial or work mistake in college or life to help us build community. Once again, thank you for listening to another episode of the Black Liberation Tech podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Renée Jordan. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and share, rate, and review the podcast to help it become more discoverable. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye.